Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. This is definitely new for me as it is for you. You'll see on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. We're officially now using StreamYard, so you'll see a lot of the cool stuff on the screen. Shout out to Will and all the guys at House Enterprise. I got to figure out which way I'm pointing. And the top, you'll see it, whatever, in YouTube. The other side, there it is. That side, the House Enterprise logo. Two Pointers Podcast is obviously officially part of house-enterprise.com. Find all the written work. You'll see some of my mock draft stuff that just recently came out. Did a co-mock draft with Phil Dexter where we alternated picks. I got the odds this time around. Had a lot of really good context and stuff going on there. So feel free to check that out. All of that will be linked in the description below. Before I get into the announcement and then talk through the Nuggets sweeping the Lakers, LeBron's questionable retirement quotes, Celtics Heat series, and then Suns head coaching search. Before we get into that, two things for you. As always, Two Pointers Podcast, as you'll see on YouTube, is presented by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Two Pointers Podcast. $20 off your first purchase if you're going to any sporting events this summer, baseball games, NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, concerts, anything that is fun this summer. $20 off your first purchase, SeatGeek.com, or link in the top of the description. If you're watching this on YouTube or on a podcast platform, you'll see it right there in the player. Click that, $20 off first purchase, SeatGeek.com, or in the app. So before we get started here, I do have a really cool announcement. It does involve some of the teams here in the next couple of days. Obviously, the Nuggets swept the Lakers. We'll talk about that in just a second, unfortunately. But the Celtics Heat series is also, as of recording this, was last night. Celtics won Game 4, so we're going to at least see, at the bare minimum, a gentleman's sweep from the Heat, or obviously Celtics have a potential to extend this series. What you're going to see now is an announcement. So on the screen on YouTube, you'll see it, but I'm also going to read it as well. Reaction podcast after every NBA Finals games will be live streamed on Twitter and YouTube of the Two Pointers Podcast. So at Two Pointers on Twitter, as well as YouTube is the Two Pointers Podcast. Those will be live streamed there. We'll be with Grayson Hill for every single game of the NBA Finals. Appreciate Grayson for his time and commitment to doing this with me. And if you can't tune in live, no big deal. They'll be posted as podcasts and YouTube videos the next day. So feel free to go ahead and subscribe on whatever you're listening to. 5-star review, a rating, all that's appreciated. So you'll get notified when those lives go when those podcasts go out. We want to make sure you're tuning in for that. I'm super excited to talk to Grayson after every NBA Finals game. Obviously, we don't know the results yet, but that begins on June 1st. Let's talk about, again, solo pod, first time in a while. Let's talk about Nuggets sweeping the Lakers. Obviously, for me, for those of you that are joining for the first time, that is not a very fun result for me as a fan of the Los Angeles Lakers. But I do just want to give the credit to the Nuggets where credit is due. I've picked them to make the finals in basically every podcast since October. So I would take a small victory lap there. I do think that they're the best team left in the conference finals, or was, obviously, after eliminating the Lakers. The thing I want to kind of just talk out loud with you guys, and I want to get your feedback on Twitter, in the YouTube comments, etc. Should people be having voter regret for MVP? I mean, I obviously gave him my impromptu MVP vote. Nikola Jokic, who averaged 27.8 points per game in this series, 14.5 rebounds, 11.8 assists. Only a handful of guys have ever done that in the conference finals. So really, really impressive from Nikola Jokic. I obviously understand the sentiment and understanding what it meant for Joel Embiid and his camp and the Sixers and the way he played this year. And that 52-point game later on in the year against Boston really cemented that MVP for Joel. But the things we're seeing from Nikola Jokic as a shot maker this series is ridiculous. Obviously, we know what he is as a playmaker. He's one of the best offensive players in basketball history, and I can't wait to dive more into him as the offseason goes on and understand where he might already be or where he is ranked as an all-time player. It can't be understated, though, that when you have a fully healthy team, this is why that they are succeeding the way they are, regardless of a weird year in the West, with some of the teams like Golden State and the Lakers having some good seasons. The Kings obviously putting the Warriors out to 7. Playoff Jamal Murray is a top 5 dude. He's just an all-time, just killer in the playoffs, right? We've seen it. 32.5 points per game as the second option on this team is crazy. 6.3 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and almost 3 steals a game. Jamal Murray came to play this series, and he was a matchup nightmare for the Lakers. Obviously, in the Golden State series, they would put Jarrett Vanderbilt on Steph Curry and figure out the Anthony Davis switches and how they're bringing him up to the perimeter. Jamal Murray didn't care. He was able to get to the basket however he wanted. Obviously, it really helps when your best player, Nikola Jokic, is the best passer in the NBA. He gets you the ball in any single spot that you really need it or want it. Jamal Murray was able to capitalize on them. Obviously, the 3 for 15, through the first 3 quarters of Game 3 was overblown. He proceeds to have 25 in the fourth or 23 in the fourth. So Jamal Murray is an unbelievable player, and he's going to be a huge difference maker for the Nuggets in the finals, whether they play, obviously long shot would be Boston. Otherwise, it would be against Miami. But Jamal Murray is going to have to really, really step up, keep this play going, because that's going to be a huge difference maker for Miami, where Kyle Lowry is going to know how to defend him very well, despite where he is in his career. If that is Kyle Lowry that end up playing, Boston, I think, is actually a tougher matchup for Denver because of just some of the defensive versatility and some of the switches that you would see there. So I think that it's going to be really important for Jamal Murray to, first of all, continue this scoring prowess, right? Like having the ability to be open for his teammates. When Michael Porter Jr. is shooting the ball well from 3, it opens up a lot of really big things for Denver when they run their 2-man with Jokic, and just seeing some of the versatility in that lineup. Jamal's a huge part of that. Defensively, like I said, almost 3 steals and half a block is crazy. He's obviously playing a lot of really good point of attack defense, and that's what you really want to see from one of your, and from your best guard, obviously, and you're putting KCP in positions to be successful as a secondary on-ball defender. So the Nuggets deserve every bit of the praise and the credit they've been given. Obviously, I wanted to lead with that because I think it was deserved, and I think it needs to be heard, because I think we shouldn't be talking about, X, Y, and Z thing right after the Nuggets win, or we shouldn't be giving the Lakers all this credit, despite how the national media likes to do things. We shouldn't be giving them all this credit for something that hasn't even happened ever, like the 0-3 thing. The Lakers should come back from 0-3, and it's like, no, this Nuggets team is legit, and they deserve every bit of the praise that they've gotten. Again, like super versatile, deep lineup. Aaron Gordon obviously struggled most of this series. He's somebody that they're going to want to lean on and rely on in that 4 spot moving forward, assuming that that's how they play him. It's going to be interesting because of the switchability of Miami, but I do think Aaron Gordon stepping up and really getting himself going again in Game 4 of the Lakers series was very, very important, and he showed that towards the end of it. I hate to do this, but I can't sit here and not address this, right? LeBron James, obviously a 20-year this year, 38 years old. To think that the clouding conversation after this Nuggets finals run was LeBron's comments, I'm not shocked per se, because I think when you get swept, you're 38 years old in your 20th season, your son's about to go play college down the road. I can understand how you might feel, right? Like, okay, a guy wants to sit here and be like, well, this is how it should go out or not go out, or I got to think about playing. Like, you could definitely tell the body is probably not doing the same things that he wanted it to do at this age, as he spent all that, $2 million a year on his body, supposedly. To think that he's somebody that was holding up so well, and then to go into a position where they make this run, right, and he wasn't prepared for, right? The first run they've made since 2020 like this, and there was a 4-month break for the bubble, right, with the COVID stoppage. So this is the longest that he's having to put on his body, and we saw that regardless of the system and the team, right, they had a slow start this year. They end up getting a lot of really impactful guys in the free, in the end of the trade deadline market. And this kind of team is obviously built very well for a guy like LeBron at his current age and his current stature. The problem is, I think, probably where he was coming from is, for Carmelo's decision to happen the same day that he gets swept, one of his closest friends and somebody that spent a long time, who was drafted the same year he was in the NBA. I mean, yeah, he wants to compete for titles at the end of the day, and that's where we want to think that LeBron is at his career, right? But, what does that do for him if he's a ring chaser and yada, yada, yada? I don't care. He's LeBron James, one of the greatest players of all time. But it's a tough conversation. I don't blame him for thinking, okay, my body's beat up. I need this time. But it's the same thing about football, where quarterback wins the Super Bowl, quarterback loses the Super Bowl, quarterback makes it to the NFC or AFC championship game, and they're beat up. Maybe an older guy. I know Big Ben had it a couple times where he's like, well, I got to think about the future in football, and he ended up playing like 4 more years. Right? Aaron Rodgers has done that before. Brady's very famous for doing that, of course. But when you play that many years, and you play that many, in football specifically, when you play that many years and that many times throughout the postseason, especially in Brady's case, your body's beat up, right? Like, you're thinking about retirement. It's why Gronk contemplated it so early so many times, right? He's getting brutal. Like, it's just brutal on the football field, right? It's the equivalent of LeBron playing 20 years, right? Like, 20 years is a long time in any sport. It's a ridiculously long time in basketball with all the miles and all the minutes on his body. So I don't blame him for being in a position to be like, Well, I'm not, he probably doesn't feel great in that press conference, right? Getting swept and just being sore and nagging that injury with the plantar fasciitis. So the timing of it's interesting. I know that this, his son, I haven't really gone down the rabbit hole of evaluating him as a prospect necessarily as much as I should have, but I think the thought process of his son being right down the road at USC for a year, take a year off maybe. I could definitely see all these possibilities, right? And then you figure out or you sign with whatever team drafts Bronny. That is still a possibility. And I think, honestly, that 4-month break in the bubble, I think, is really, really undervalued from what it did for the Lakers and what it did for that run for a team like, or guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron who are notoriously hurt. It's at least recently hurt for LeBron's case. Don't aggregate that. But that break was important, right? Those guys got 4 months to just recover and keep their body right and work privately. I'm sure they all got $1 million houses with basketball courts, so they were able to still stay in game shape and be ready for the bubble. I think that was really important. I think at that stage of the career that we see with LeBron, I don't think it's understated, or I think it's understated too much. That I don't think a year off is probably a bad thing. Would it be weird? Yeah, don't get me wrong. Brady did the whole in and out of retirement thing. Somebody in another sport that's kind of like that in their part of their career stepped away once, didn't end up not stepping away, ended up playing another year, didn't go well, etc. So we thought he might have been done when he left New England. Obviously goes to Tampa and wins the title. So I don't know. I think we're in this really interesting crossroads, and honestly, it's just going to be a matter of patience. I think LeBron needs the offseason to just kind of take time off and understand where he is as a player and where he is as a professional when it comes to his health. So by no means do I think this is a bad thing if he takes a year off and comes back. I just would not like this to be the way he retires. I know people are going to be the ultimate Twitter troll and make the jokes about, he's never going to retire without a getaway tour or whatever they call it, retirement tour. It's like, maybe that's not what he wants. I don't know. I know that that's completely anti-LeBron and atypical of what people think of him, and the whole breaking Kareem's record and taking 12 minutes to go through that ceremony. Maybe it's just something he was contemplating in that moment. He obviously trusts Dave McMenamin very, very well, because he wouldn't make those comments to somebody else other than that. Brian Windhorst, Dave McMenamin, those kind of guys are all guys he trusts, has been around the organization or him for a very long time. So you can tell when a comment to a reporter is definitely more valid from LeBron, because it's a guy. It'll be those common guys that you're used to. So let's not overthink it. Let's enjoy the fact that was just LeBron's 20th NBA season. That is an achievement in and of itself. And honestly, he can continue to play at a high level. We know that, and the playoffs showed that regardless of the struggles down the stretch. And I can't wait to see how this turns out. All right, so Celtics Heat in the East. Like I said, recording it the next day after Game 4, where Boston went on the road at Miami and got a win to at least push it to a potential gentleman's sweep for Miami. Boston finds their new life. I don't have a ton of just super big breakdown about Boston and about what they've done. And I think they look dead in the water after Game 2. Obviously, Game 3, they lose Game 3. I just don't know where I am long-term about the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They're both worth $50+ million right now, according to the new All-NBA stipulations with their contracts and their extensions and how it works. So are you going to want to put in over $100 million into those guys? I think that's a conversation for another time. I think that's a conversation for the offseason to see where they go, because we obviously know the uncertainty at head coach, and I'm going to address that in just a second. I do think it's important to mention. But I mean, obviously, we've seen some struggles from these guys and their shooting percentages, and that was some of the biggest things or knocks on them in the Warriors final series last year. Was they make it all this way, they have all these great series, they overcome this adversity, and then they get there and they're tired and they shoot 30% from the field and they do this and they do that. Don't get me wrong, the team is not shooting very, very well from the field in this Boston series. So obviously, that leans on their best star in Jason Tatum, but I'm going to always side with the let's continue to see it first, because, yes, championship windows are so all over the place. They're so unpredictable, right? And this might be a window that closes with Jason Tatum at 24 years old or whatever, 25 years old. But everything that, the history of the NBA has taught us is, the prime of your careers, 26, 27, 28, depending on, now in the modern NBA, 28 to 32, right? So everything we know about Jason Tatum right now is not, written with the book, or the book's not written, the chapter's not finished kind of deal. And I think that's important, because the Heat kind of, I'm not saying Jason Tatum's this ridiculous physical specimen that we should always, that we should always just sit here and, hold true to, yeah, he's gonna take another step up. He's gonna add more weight, add more muscle, whatever. But the Heat, just as a team, versus guys like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, who's old in his career, Robert Williams, who's, injury prone would be a light way to put it. The Heat are just more physical, and they're more dominant, and they're better coached. And I think that's my little fun laying the plane transition into talking about Joe Mazzulla for a moment. I have to get ahead of this though. I think it's ridiculous to call for a guy's head this early. Like, I just need that to be known. Like, 34-year-old head coach, yes, not a long coaching experience, understandably. Was under Brad Stevens, was under Ime Udoka, etc. This is a guy that clearly lost the locker room. I mean, he said it himself towards the end of the series here. And I can understand where he's coming from and the frustration, right? But to not have any experience, later down the bench, it's not his fault in that regard. What is his fault is understanding to make adjustments. And I think that's the thing that's going to get overblown because of the fact that it's season one, right? The interim guy that gets the full-time job and trust him and trust the system. And it just doesn't work out, right? And I think I am always going to lean on, like, the coach has their own responsibility of making adjustments, right? The players can adjust things on the floor, on the fly, don't get me wrong. But how you win series and how you change series, they should have lost the Philly series because he didn't make any adjustments till Game 6. And that's not something that can happen with a roster that's this talented, that has a lot of question marks, right? You don't know how and who and what you're going to be playing with in the next few years. And it's really important to have a coach that's aligned with that strategy and knows how to adapt and adjust with the guys that are going to be given to him. And I just don't see that kind of adjustment being made from him. But to say all that, I don't think you need to be coming for his head. Like, that is just not what I'm about when it comes to giving a guy who is 34 years old, who in his first NBA season, he needs to be given time, right? That is ridiculous to be calling for his fire in year one. It doesn't make sense. I can't buy that, right? I think he's a good coach. He was selected for a reason, right? Like, I think we understate the fact that he was just given the job. It's like he was given that job, and obviously it was closer to the beginning of the year with Ime Udoka. I understand that, but it's really important to know that he was chosen for a reason, right? They saw some potential there as a young head coach, maybe a little too young relating to some of the guys actually being younger than Al Horford. So I just don't, some of the dynamic stuff there, but Al's a professional through and through, so I don't think that really matters. But you got your guys like Grant Williams, Marcus Smart, so right, you're dealing with these highly regarded, strong personalities, and I don't know if Joe Mazzulla, maybe at 34 years old is prepared for that yet. So regardless, from an X's and O's standpoint, from an adjustment standpoint, he's got to be better. And I think he needs to be given another chance, and I think he needs to spend a lot of time this offseason understanding what he's got and how he's going to adapt to it. So I do think that needs to be stated. Miami's just straight up punking this team, and at the end of the day, like, this game's going to go back to Boston for Game 5. Boston's probably going to win Game 5, and we're going to be like, uh-oh, is it happening now? Here we go. But setting us up for a Nuggets Heat Finals, which will be previewed at some point before that series starts on June 1st. So looking forward to talking about that in a little bit more detail. Let's go move on to talking about the Suns' head coaching search before we get out of here. So last topic before we get out of here shortly. Suns head coach search has been narrowed down according to multiple reports. I believe Yahoo Sports was the last one to report it recently. I decided, let's do a little something. Let's power rank these guys based on what I would do if I was the Suns front office. And I have very publicly been a huge fan of Monty Williams. Did not think he deserved the firing. I've also been a huge fan of James Jones, right? I know that the player, it's supposedly that Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Matt Ishbia, they all had a huge hand in figuring out the next steps, and Monty Williams was a casualty of that. I didn't agree with it, but let's power rank the finalists here from 5 to 1 of guys that are up for it. I'll name them really fast, and then we'll power rank them. Nick Nurse, Frank Vogel, Kevin Young, Jordy Fernandez, and Doc Rivers. I'm going to start with Mr. Doc Rivers, who I am not shocked he will be a finalist in a lot of these head coaching places. Again, he obviously is an all-time tenured coach when it comes to just being around, winning big games, winning games. Obviously, I know how some of the 3-1 series have gone and some of the choking in the playoffs has gone. He's still Doc Rivers. He's still a strong-willed head coach. The issue is I think he's going to be 5 here on my power ranking of the finalists because he mishandles star rotations and fits at every place he's had a problem with. Boston obviously will handle those guys, get that title there. I'm not discrediting anything he's done in his career in a regular season setting. I just think once you get to the playoffs, understanding your best guys and how they play, and some of the rotations I saw from Philly this year, I just wasn't impressed with from an adjustment standpoint. Now, to manage how Maxey and Harden were supposed to balance their minutes there throughout the year, I think that was impressive. But I think Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, I'm not projecting his son's Kyrie Irving trade or anything. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, depending on, knows how to coach Chris Paul in the past, assuming Chris Paul doesn't get moved here in the offseason. Wouldn't be shocked by anything out of the Phoenix Suns organization at this moment, but Doc Rivers I don't think is going to fit because of some of the understanding of how to manage these stars and manage their minutes, as well as playing your best lineup in the playoffs and understanding what's the best matchup. I just don't think he's very good at. I'm not saying guys ahead of him like Kevin Young and Jordi Fernandez are important, or are much better than Doc in that regard. We don't know, right? These will be first-time head coaches, but I just can't give Doc that credit right now because of just the recent history of what he's been lacking, I guess would be the point. Number 4, I have Jordi Fernandez, who has experience under Nuggets first-time NBA Finals coach Michael Malone. Michael Malone obviously is now, just made the finals we talked about with Denver. Jordi Fernandez was an assistant there for the better part of almost a decade, and now spent 1 year as the associate head coach under Mike Brown. So I would give him the benefit of the doubt as a defensive coach and understanding what to do. I do like how much Malone and Mike Brown did lean on him and try to use him in positions and timeouts and things throughout the year. Don't know enough about the guy, but I think I'd have to give him the credit just because of the fact that where he comes from. I'm a coaching tree guy. I've always believed in that, and obviously he was a big part of the Kings' defense this year, being a lot of the ones that orchestrates some of those calls, some of those defensive switches and matchups, and understanding what they need to be as a team. So I think Jordi Fernandez had a huge hand in that, and I do think he's a very good option there. Obviously, I'm giving him more benefit of the doubt than Doc Rivers, regardless of the fact that he's a first-year head coach or would be. And track record of those guys right now with Joe Mazzulla and some others. Joe Mazzulla is obviously the bad example of track record, but there was a lot of first-year head coaches last year that had a lot of very good things. So Chauncey Billups and Willie Green and Mosley and the Magic organization. I'm stuttering here and trying to figure out all these guys' names really quick, but without having it written down. But a lot of these first-year guys can figure it out, and I think they're given a fair chance if need be. So Jordi Fernandez is probably one of the better guys. I'd love to get some opinions of just what people think of him out in the NBA. Kevin Young would be number 3. Kevin Young would be, I'm giving him the small edge just because of the Suns inside guy, right? He's the guy that was in that system with Monty, which can't discredit anything. Monty had the most wins in the NBA as a head coach since 2021. So Kevin Young, well-respected inside that organization. He coached under Doc in Philly for a little while, so at least from a scheme standpoint, I'm going to have my question marks there. But I do think that he's the guy, and he's considered, he was immediately considered for this job, so there's got to be something there from an organizational trust standpoint. I don't have much more to give you for that, but he's the guy that they would want to go with if they did go with the first-time guy because of the understanding of the Suns organization and understanding of the roster and the players he has there. Frank Vogel, I have at number 2. Frank Vogel was a last-minute addition to these head coaching rumors and finalists, et cetera, in the last 24 hours. I think the way he handled the roster and some of the stars that he had in Los Angeles as obviously an NBA champion and obviously a defensive guy we know from his time in Indiana and knowing what the Lakers were in 2020 and 2021 before he was canned. Probably not for the better, but Darvin Ham obviously has been a very good head coach. I do buy into the defensive part of what he brings. Obviously, the roster construction is going to be important as Devin Booker and Kevin Durant at their stage in their career aren't exactly, otherworldly defenders, right? So I think Frank Vogel is a guy that understands scheme and understands how he can adapt his guys to his system. And I think the role players around him are going to have to be, think about Mikal Bridges, right? I know, right? The guy that got traded for Kevin Durant. Mikal Bridges is an unbelievable fit in a Frank Vogel system as a switchable, versatile 3-and-D wing. I just think the benefit of the doubt there of winning a championship, being a very, very respected defensive coach over the years, I would love to see offensively how he balances the Kevin Durant and Devin Booker isolation and some of that stuff. So Frank Vogel, I do think, deserves to be a finalist for this job. last, but certainly not least, or at least first in this case, not last, but Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse knows how to handle the star impact with Kawhi Leonard in 2019 as a head coach that made the big decision to switch around the guards with Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, and understanding what they brought to the table in that finals and what made a difference for them against the Warriors. Big defensive guy. I've always been a Nick Nurse guy through and through. I'm hoping that he gets a head coaching job. I really don't think he was fired for the right reason in Toronto. I think it's just a matter of direction the organization is going in, and I think he didn't want to play some of the young guys that maybe Masai Ujiri and some of the front office really wanted, and that's why we saw him get canned, playing a lot of guys really high minutes and understanding how to go about that conversation. Sometimes when you lose the organization or you lose the trust and how they're bringing you to the table and what they're allowing you to do as a head coach, I think that sometimes speaks volumes to why guys get fired. Perfect example, Dwayne Casey was fired in Detroit after, a month after he was received the Head Coach of the Year award. So, things change very quickly and directions of organizations change very quickly. I think the Kawhi Leonard stuff when he had him for 1 year, yes, that was 1 year, and understanding a guy after 3 to 5, 7 years, whatever, is a lot different. But I like the way he handled Kawhi, and I like the way he handled that team. He's a very, very strong-minded individual who over time has been in really good systems. So I do think he brings a lot to the table from a head coaching standpoint. I, again, have always been in the Nick Nurse camp of believing in him as a head coach, and I think, the receipts back themselves up there with the Toronto championship. So I do believe in Nick Nurse, and I do think he's a very good option for the Suns. I think there's some underrated names out there, but there's no point in really discussing them because, well, these are the finalists according to Phoenix, right? I don't think J.J. Redick or anybody like that. I know he's interviewed for the Toronto job. I think that was more for head coaching experience moving forward. Supposedly, Houston men's basketball coach Kelvin Sampson, I'm like getting a headache thinking about it. He interviewed for the Bucks job. Supposedly, he's always wanted to be an NBA coach. I wonder if that's the right fit or role, but I guess he doesn't want to go from Houston to a 25-win NBA team. So, fair. But I do think Nick Nurse ultimately putting a bow on the head coaching search for the Suns. It's going to be interesting to watch how some of these interviews and some of the intel come out. But I do think that Nick Nurse is the best candidate for this job. My prediction, I think ultimately they do go with Nurse, but I would not also be shocked if they went with Doc Rivers. Just because of the, if that's what the players want, if that's what Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, obviously Chris Paul is going to probably speak to this hiring very, very well, assuming that, he's in on that decision or trying to at least make his input known that Doc Rivers is obviously somebody he spent many years with in Los Angeles with the Clippers. I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch that Doc Rivers it'll probably be between Nick Nurse and Doc Rivers, all things considered. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. A couple things on the way out of here. As you'll see on the screen, 2 pointers, code 2 pointers for SeatGeek.com. $20 off your first purchase. You'll see that on the ticker for YouTube. If not, I just told you, $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek, link in the top of the description. Don't forget, announcement is on the screen on YouTube. Reaction podcast after every NBA Finals game, live on Twitter and YouTube with friend of the program, Grayson Hill, host of the 10 or 9 podcast. If you can't tune in, they will be posted the next morning. So don't worry. They will be out there. You will be able to catch them, no problem. Hope everyone likes the StreamYard setup, the new visual aspect. If you're listening to this on Apple, Spotify, Google, or anywhere you get your podcasts, feel free to check it out on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. 5-star review and a rating is greatly appreciated. My Twitter is on the screen on StreamYard right over here. At 2 Pointers on Twitter, 2 Pointers Podcast on every other major podcast platform. Don't forget to check out my mock draft joint mock that I did with Phil Dexter. At the top, you'll see on houseenterprise.com. House-Enterprise will be in the description below. Go check out that mock draft where your favorite team might have taken, where I might have taken, or Phil might have taken your favorite player in this draft. So I had a lot of really good fun here today talking to myself for the first time in a while. A lot of really cool guests and a lot of really fun things coming up in the next few weeks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the 2 Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. We'll see you later.